where we are now into that next step. And I'll transition into our last question here because it's kind of the overarching question that is always in this conversation. That is, MLS is a top 10 league, it's a top five league, it's a bottom 30 league. Like this whole conversation of where do we rank amongst other leagues. I would just like to kind of throw it out there to you and say, where are we? And if we're not top 10, how can we get there?
Unfortunately, I don't think we are. I think we're close. I think we're on the margins, but I don't think we are. So I think obviously you take the top five out. I think we're definitely behind them. I'd say we're certainly behind, no question, we're behind the Portuguese league. I think no question we're behind Eredivisie. I would put us behind the Jupiler League. I'd put us behind Liga MX. I'd put us behind Super League. I'd put us behind the Championship. I'd definitely put us behind the Brasileiro. Basically, I'd put us basically in 13th. But it's close, man. Once you get beyond those top five, there's a other than, in my opinion, probably championship. There's a lot of depth in the championship. Not as top heavy as what you'll see in like Portugal, Holland, those types of places. But really good mid-level depth. I think the same thing with Serie A. Oh, you have some great teams at the top of Serie A, but that's a deep league. Other than those two leagues in the top five, I think you can make a really convincing argument, and one that I personally believe that from the middle down, MLS is better than basically all those leagues. Um, where we suffer is exactly what we're talking about. Those top teams can't separate themselves. They can't spend more. They're tethered in spending to the bottom teams. So how do we get better? We got to allow those teams to fly a little bit, right? You got to allow those teams to be able to spend a little bit more. Could Inter Miami raise to the level of Palmeiras? Can they attract the players? Can they spend the money? Yeah, they can. Probably very quickly. In soccer, you can turn over a roster much quicker than you can in other sports. And some of those roster rules are going to allow you to do it. But can an LA Galaxy, can an LAFC, can an Atlanta United, reach the level of, in 3 or 4 years of some of these top, European teams? Maybe not the best team. Going to take some time to probably catch what Benfica and Porto are doing. You know, Probably take some time to catch, some of the best teams in the Eredivisie, even though those are younger teams, and some of you know, they're heavily reliant on being able to sell players, unlike a lot of the MLS teams. But so I guess the long answer to a short question is not yet. But I mean, if you give some flexibility, I think MLS could pretty quickly, probably within 4 to 6 windows, match what they're doing in Portugal. I
Yeah.
just do. Maybe not. You're probably still going to have some separation between the top of MLS because I do think you want to maintain some parity and Benfica, and Porto, Sporting, but better than all the rest, yeah. And much deeper and a much more competitive league, yeah. And maybe a more fun to watch league because of that competitiveness, yeah. So I think you can get to that sixth spot in a hurry, and then you start to reel in League One, and you just, as MLS is kind of done. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, if you asked me, I'd probably say we're 25th-ish. So the rise where we have is not nothing, but we're not going to get beyond where we are right now. As we talked when we first started with a budget and allocation of 11 to 13 million for each team.
Right.
You're not going to get there with that. You got to give teams that want to excel more flexibility to do so. And is that going to happen in the next CBA? I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean,
Yeah.
everything about watching MLS and their salary roster rules says that it'll probably be a half solution.
Mhm.
And we'll continue to move up slowly, and maybe we get to the 10 spot and they're happy with that. But I really feel like, as you were kind of talking about, now is the time to sort of put your foot on the gas a little bit, or at least allow teams to be more aggressive within limits, right?
Yeah.
Within some limits. But if you look at the overall spending in the non-top five leagues, it's not a huge gap. It's just not a huge gap. And in many cases, and I know capology and salary sport and stuff like that are extremely flawed. A lot of times you look at it and you're like, that's just not right. But uh, if you look at that, if you're looking at the middle, MLS is already really outspending them. And now that you're looking at, you know, I mean, LAFC does the same revenue basically as Benfica. Miami does the same revenue as Ajax. Those are two of the best non-top five teams in Europe. Why the hell can't we then raise the level of our league beyond their leagues? It's just all about ambition, and it's about kind of moving some of those. One of the questions you were asking me is, about cheap owners holding us back, and yeah, man, when you got when you got Greg Kerfoot and Clark Hunt running the competition committee, yeah, cheap owners are holding us back. Cheap owners are holding us back.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you got to move those guys out of decision making. You got to allow, you know, owners like Jorge Mas to more flexibility to turn this league into what it really can be. So
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think we are on the outside. I think it's weird because that like the top 10 moniker again is it branches over a lot of things. Are we top 10 in spending? Are we top 10 in on quality play? Are we top 10 in whatever? And I think it can be put on like a bunch of different hats. And one of the things that I think, I think you're always going to have, like we've talked about, this group that's like, oh, it's never going to be a top 10, and it's because that they don't rate our Champions League, like the European Champions League. Oh, it's top 10 because they've got Pro Rel over there, so the bottom's always intense. And they're not just playing for the title, but they're also playing for this big Champions League that's the biggest competition in the world outside the World Cup. Like it means so much more. So I think on the outside of what we can do, somebody's got to fix Champions League here, like, or Champions Cup, right? So, but now again, a completely other story. Which again, we could sit here for 4 hours and talk about every single thing wrong, but I don't think anybody would listen to that for 4 hours. But outside of that, I think the other big thing that will hold us back is from a general viewpoint of like, oh, how's this league doing? If somebody turns in and sees every stadium like Atlanta packed to the brim, or Seattle or LAFC packed out, singing, chanting, whatever, every single team like that, it will elevate them as like, oh, this is serious in that country. Right. But if you turn into, and I'll use Red Bull again as the example, a Red Bull where it's, you can you can count the number of people more than you can count the number of empty seats. That's where you're going to start dragging your feet a little bit. Like I said, I've been to Cincinnati, I've been to Orlando now, and I've been to Charlotte. Charlotte being a football stadium was the only one I was in that wasn't packed, and it was mid-August. So the top bowl was open, and you had different seats there, but the supporters groups are growing really well. It's just how do you get the casual to be a every week in and out sort of thing. And I think if we could fix those two things, Champions League and just general fan, attendance and caring about their club, I think it helps us jump into there. And then you move on to the roster rules that we've talked all the way about. But I think those are two really big things that we would need to really hone in on, because no matter what we do with our roster rules, if we're still going out and buying these, like Atlanta's looking at Bamba and Lede La and all these sorts of like really good in prime players, but if nobody knows about them and they're just like, whatever, and they don't want to come because, again, going back to conversations that we just had, right? The team isn't caring about the on the field, or they're not caring about the connection to the club or the fans, and they're only worried about their money and winning, and it doesn't turn things over. I think that would hold us back from the casual, and I use the term lightly these days, but the casual Euro snob in America who's like, oh man, look at Man United's 80,000 a game. You guys only get 15. You're nowhere near a top 10, right? Like, it's who are you asking the question of the top 10 to? I think determines where you need to make changes to get them into the top 10, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think what you're talking about, especially what you're talking about with Red Bull, it comes down to owners too, right? MLS is was over, attendance was up 5%. It was over 23,000 on the top 10 solidly, top eight in attendance. There's a lot of good markets like I watch St. Louis games, I watch games in LA, I watch games in a lot of markets, especially new stadiums, Columbus, Nashville, great games in Nashville from an energy
Mhm.
perspective. So I think there's a lot of good, but the places where it's off are in places where the ownership is just not dedicated, right?
Right.
You
Oh yeah.
know, unfortunately in New York, I think most Red Bull fans probably understand quite well where in the pecking order Red Bull New York sits in comparison to, Leipzig, Salzburg, and even Bragantino now seems to be ahead of them in the pecking order. And if you're trying to build a fan base in New York, that's not going to fly. You're going to have to go out there and go beyond just adding an Emil Forsberg from another one of your teams and saying, "Hey, we're dedicated." And you hope they still lean into the academy side of things, and they just spent a ton of money on that academy facility. It looks amazing. But some of these leagues, and then you look at what's going on with Stan Kroenke in Colorado, that's not acceptable. How are you going to build a fan base anywhere? I don't care where it is. If you're not dedicating to putting the best product on the pitch, if you're not reinvesting in your facilities, if you're not, investing in the first team, if you're not investing in the academy, you need to do it all. You don't have to spend, you know, as much as some teams do. You don't have to be going out there and spending 780 million on a new stadium, but you can't be just clearly in a situation where it's painfully obvious that this team is not the most important thing. Winning is not the most important thing. And not every team is going to operate at the top level of spending. But the teams that struggle with the energy, with the attendance, are pretty much all teams where the owner kind of sucks.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
100%. Like I want to make it, because I'm assuming a couple of my Red Bull fan friends are listening. Attendance has increased very, very much over the last couple of years. Like I'm not saying it's we're down in the dumps or anything, but I watched back a game with 2013. It was like just a regular season game. Thierry Henry was there. That was back when they had that big surge of big name DPs. There wasn't an open seat in the house, and it was packed and it was bumping. And 10 years on now, and it's like it's different, right? And that can be attested to the fact that we didn't spend money on anybody for 5 years, right, from 2019 to about last year. And when we did, we brought in Emil Forsberg from one of our teams. Now we've got Eric Choupo-Moting, who we'll see how he works out in terms of pulling, but that's not the Thierry Henry that these people were used to, right? So they set up by bar high and then they changed paths and like, okay, well, I don't want to watch this anymore. It's there are a whole bunch of different things that go into it, but yeah, I definitely think fan
I don't
attention is big.
I don't even in a market like New York, I don't think it's necessarily you got to go out there and sign Thierry Henry or
Mhm.
some modern level of player like that, Neymar, whatever it might be. I think Atlanta United really kind of showed that, right? They went out and at the time they started breaking transfer records. They went out and got Joseph Martinez. I guarantee you, Atlanta fans didn't know who he was, but when they looked into it, excited about it, they're like, "Oh, yeah, I can get down with this." You look at Miguel Almiron again setting records. I mean, if I was Cincinnati, I'd be really excited about Kevin Dinke.
Oh yeah,
And most of them probably didn't know who he was. But all you got to do is put on a highlight tape of his and get excited about him. And those are some of the kind of signings that I think I'd like to see for Red Bull. Is like you're talking about. You know, there's so many times over the years that Red Bull has been third, fourth, fifth place in the East. Kind of challenging. You look at them and you're like, game model's working. They got a ton of great young pieces. They've got some veteran pieces that are firing. They're one or two guys short. And how many summer transfer windows did you go through where it's just like came and went?
yeah,
Um, and that's where that ownership piece comes in to say, we're going to do what it takes in this window to push us over the edge to try to win. May fail, but now we can do it. And that's where some of the other rules come into place now because they had some cover when they went out and signed Dante Van Zier and it didn't really work out. Well, we can't move him. We're not going to buy him out for $15 million or whatever it is. Probably not even that much with Van Zier, but so we're just going to have to live with him. So that's going to put a ceiling on what we can do. Well, now you got two buyouts every year. Now you can loan a player out and open a DP spot. So things like that are going to allow those teams, and I think they're really going to provide less cover for owners who aren't aggressive in doing that. who are sitting in those spots. I mean, you brought up Charlotte. I mean, it didn't work for them last year. They were sitting in the kind of that, playoff home field conversation, getting into those top four spots, and they went out. They were aggressive. They missed on a lot of guys. They didn't bring in the quality they probably wanted, but at least they were aggressive, and that's where I think you just, as fans, as me as a fan of the league, and as you as a fan of Red Bulls, I think that's really all you can really ask for is that ownership provides, your front office with the ability to go out and the resource to be able to go out and, fill in the gaps when they're there and when you have an opportunity to win.
Yeah. And one last point on Red Bull because I will talk for hours if I have to. Their style of play is not attractive in the slightest, and well, it's gotten better, but over those 5 year period where they were transitioning from the big names to the academy kids and transitioning into energy drink high press soccer, it was abysmal. I mean, it was just a terrible, terrible watch. So that also leads to it. But like I said, we can talk about how bad Red Bull are all day, but we did make an MLS Cup, so I can at least say
Yeah.
I've seen
I
one.
mean, I didn't enjoy the soccer in the playoffs from you guys, but I will say this, 2018 was some of the best soccer that's been played in MLS.
Oh
I think.
yeah, oh yeah,
So if you have a Bradley Wright Phillips up front or somebody of that caliber, if you have a Sasha Question, if you have a Tyler Adams in that system, it can look pretty good. The problem, I guess, for you all has just been when you've moved those guys on, which is fine. MLS is going to be a selling league. Every league is a selling league, basically. I mean, you're seeing it in the EPL where they've got to sell players.
Mhm.
There's no league that's not a selling league. But you just want them to bring in those replacement pieces to have the resources available to do it. And they've certainly moved off. They were one of the biggest movers in salary this year in terms of increases. They had been near the bottom for years. So you hope that continues and you hope they hit with some of this stuff and maybe they're able to move off Van Zier and, bring in that extra piece because, I think they're close. I think they're close. And that's what you want as you're, a fan of one of these teams is just that teams are going to aggressively go out and move. I mean, Austin's a good example. I don't know if it's going to work, but they spent 30 million over the last two windows.
Yeah, they're
Actually
trying.
more than that. Probably up about 35 million in the last two windows. And at least as a fan, I can live with losing if my team is really good. Maybe not as a Chicago fan, they need to win. But if you're a team that consistently your ownership goes for it and gives your front office is aggressive, then I think you can live with that. What this just goes back to everything else. You want these teams to be going out there and trying to put the absolute best product on the pitch that the rules allow. And
Yep.
you want more and more of these owners to be pushing MLS to loosen the rules. And hopefully we're starting to see a little bit of that. Some of the changes, expansion of the competition committee. Yeah, the true test is probably going to be over these next couple of years as to whether or not MLS is actually going to reach those heights anytime soon. So it'll be
We
fun to
we
watch.
we can only wait and see and kind of keep our fingers crossed because I think there's a lot of potential there, but it's out of our hands. We can only urge them on. But